Have you ever been thrown out of your own home? For a woman your husband claims he never stopped loving. That's exactly what happened to Soo-Min on a cold November evening in Seoul, the night her entire world collapsed, only to rise from the ashes in ways she never imagined. The rain was falling in sheets when Soo-Min stepped through the front door of the apartment she had called home for 6 years. She was exhausted, her feet aching from a 12-hour shift at the small bakery where she worked. Her shoulders were tense, her back hurt from standing all day, and all she wanted was a hot shower in the comfort of her own bed. But the pregnancy test in her purse felt like it was burning a hole through the fabric. 2 pink lines that had changed everything just that morning. She had been waiting all day to tell Jun-Seo, rehearsing the words in her head 1,000 times. After 3 years of marriage and countless disappointments, they were finally going to be parents. Surely this news would bring them closer together. Surely this would be the thing that finally made him look at her the way he used to. But something was wrong. She could feel it the moment she walked in. The apartment was too quiet. Usually, Jun-Seo would be watching television or working on his laptop, the sounds of normal life filling the space. But tonight there was only silence. Heavy, oppressive silence that made Soo-Min's skin prickle with unease. She found them in the living room. Jun-Seo was sitting on the couch, and he wasn't alone. A woman sat beside him, beautiful, elegant, with perfectly styled hair cascading over her shoulders in soft waves. She wore a designer dress that probably cost more than Soo-Min made in 3 months. And her makeup was flawless in that effortless way that only money could buy. Diamond earrings glittered at her ears, and her manicured nails were painted a deep, confident red. The woman looked at Soo-Min with a mixture of triumph and barely concealed contempt, as if Soo-Min were an unexpected cockroach that had scurried across the floor. Jun-Seo. Soo-Min's voice came out smaller than she intended, barely more than a whisper. What's going on? Her husband didn't look at her. He kept his eyes fixed on the floor, his jaw tight, his hands clasped together so hard the knuckles were white. He looked like a man preparing for an execution, but whose execution? Soo-Min wasn't sure. Soo-Min, we need to talk. Who is this? But even as she asked, a cold dread was already creeping through her veins like ice water. She knew. Somewhere deep inside she already knew. The way the woman was sitting, proprietary and comfortable in Soo-Min's home. The way Jun-Seo couldn't meet her eyes. The way the air in the room felt charged with betrayal. This is Yoon-Ah, Jun-Seo said quietly, still staring at his hands. My first love. From college. The words hit Soo-Min like physical blows. First love. He had mentioned her once, years ago, when they were still dating. A girlfriend he'd had before they met, someone who had broken his heart when she left to study abroad. He had spoken about her with such wistfulness that Soo-Min had felt jealous of a ghost. But ghosts didn't sit on your couch wearing Chanel. The woman, Yoon-Ah, smiled sweetly, but her eyes were cold as winter. It's nice to finally meet you, Soo-Min. Jun-Seo has told me so much about you. She tilted her head, examining Soo-Min from her worn sneakers to her simple cardigan to her makeup-free face. Although I have to say I expected... Well, never mind. The insult was subtle but unmistakable. Soo-Min felt her cheeks flush with shame, and then anger. This woman was in her home, sitting next to her husband, and she had the audacity to look at Soo-Min like she was nothing. Jun-Seo, what is she doing in our home? Soo-Min demanded, her voice stronger now. Why is she here? Finally he looked up at her. And in his eyes, she saw something that shattered her heart into a million pieces. Guilt, yes, but also resolution. The look of a man who had already made his decision and was just going through the motions of informing her. Soo-Min, I'm sorry. I didn't plan for this to happen. But Yoon-Ah came back into my life 3 months ago and He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. I realized I never stopped loving her. I've been lying to myself, and to you, For our entire marriage. 3 months. 3 months he had been seeing this woman while Soo-Min worked double shifts at the bakery to help pay off their debts, while she cooked his meals and washed his clothes and worried about their finances, while she scheduled doctor's appointments about fertility treatments and cried alone in the bathroom when each month brought another disappointment. 3 months of lies. 3 months of betrayal. 3 months of looking her in the eye and pretending everything was fine. "You're having an affair." The words felt like broken glass in her mouth, cutting her from the inside. "You've been cheating on me. For 3 months." "It's not cheating if it's true love," Yoon-Ah interjected, her voice sickeningly sweet, like honey poured over poison. "Jun-Seo and I were meant to be together. We were torn apart by circumstances years ago. My family insisted I study abroad, and the distance was too much. But fate brought us back to each other. Don't you see? This was always supposed to happen." She reached over and took Jun-Seo's hand, right in front of Soo-Min, her red nails a stark contrast against his skin. "You were just a placeholder, a way to pass the time until I came back. Surely you understand." Soo-Min wanted to scream. She wanted to throw something, to overturn the coffee table, to demand answers, to make them feel even a fraction of the pain that was tearing through her chest. But she was frozen, rooted to the spot, unable to process the magnitude of the betrayal unfolding before her. 3 years of marriage. 3 years of trying to make him happy. 3 years of putting his needs before her own, supporting his dreams, believing in their future together. And it all meant nothing. She had been nothing. Just a placeholder. Just a warm body to fill the space until his real love returned. "I want a divorce," Jun-Seo said, his voice steadying now that the worst was out. "Yoon-Ah and I are going to get married. Her father owns Hanjin Corporation. They're willing to invest in my startup if I'm free." He had the decency to look slightly ashamed at this admission. "It's a good opportunity, a chance I can't pass up." So that was it. Not just love, but money, power, status, everything Soo-Min could never give him with her bakery wages and her simple dreams of a happy home. Hanjin Corporation. Even Soo-Min, who paid little attention to business news, knew that name. One of the largest pharmaceutical companies in Korea, worth billions. And Jun-Seo was willing to throw away their marriage for a slice of that pie. "You're throwing away 3 years of marriage for business connections?" Her voice cracked, and she hated herself for showing weakness in front of this woman. "Jun-Seo, I thought you loved me. We were building a life together. We were going to have—" She stopped herself, her hand instinctively moving to her stomach before she caught herself. The pregnancy test in her purse suddenly felt like a cruel joke played by a malicious universe. She had been so excited to tell him, so sure that this baby would bring them closer together. But she wasn't going to give them this, wasn't going to let them know. Let Jun-Seo sign those divorce papers thinking he was walking away clean and free. "You were going to have what?" Jun-Seo asked, a flicker of something. Concern? Curiosity? Crossing his face. "Nothing." Soo-Min's voice was hollow. "Nothing at all. I did care about you, Soo-Min." Jun-Seo at least had the grace to look uncomfortable. "But it was never what I had with Yoon-Ah. What we have is special. It's different. I'm sorry, but I need you to leave. Tonight." "Leave?" Soo-Min couldn't believe what she was hearing. "This is my home, too. I paid for half of everything here with my own money. The deposit, the furniture, the—" Yoon-Ah laughed, a delicate tinkling sound that made Soo-Min's skin crawl. "Sweetie, look around. What could someone like you have possibly contributed? A few won from your little bakery job?" She gestured dismissively at Soo-Min's worn coat and practical shoes, her lip curling in distaste. "Jun-Seo needs someone who can match his ambitions. Someone with class, connections, and resources. You were holding him back." Soo-Min waited for Jun-Seo to defend her, to say something, anything, to acknowledge the years she had spent supporting him. She had believed in his startup when no one else did. She had taken extra shifts to cover bills when his business wasn't making money. She had encouraged him through every setback, celebrated every small victory, been his rock through everything. But he didn't defend her. He didn't say a single word. He just sat there, staring at his hands, as if the woman he had promised to love and cherish didn't even exist. That silence hurt more than anything else. "I'll have my lawyer send you the divorce papers," Jun-Seo said finally, still not meeting her eyes. "You can take whatever personal belongings you can carry tonight. The rest, we can discuss later." Something shifted inside Soo-Min then, something fundamental and irreversible. The part of her that had always been gentle, always been accommodating, always believed the best in people and tried to see the good in every situation. That part of her began to harden into something else entirely. Something cold. Something that would one day make them both regret this moment, with every fiber of their beings. "Fine." Her voice was steady now, eerily calm. The tears had stopped, replaced by an icy composure that seemed to unsettle both Jun-Seo and Yoon-Ah. "I'll go. But remember this night, Jun-Seo. Remember how you threw me out like garbage for a woman you haven't seen in 10 years. Remember how you chose business connections over the wife who stood by you when you had nothing." She took a step closer, and something in her expression made Jun-Seo lean back slightly. "Because one day, you're going to wish you could take it all back. One day, you're going to realize exactly what you threw away tonight. And on that day, when you come crawling back begging for a second chance." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "I won't be there to forgive you." She walked to the bedroom with her head held high, ignoring the whispered conversation behind her. The closet was small. Jun-Seo had always taken most of the space, and it didn't take long to pack a single bag with her essentials. Some clothes, her toiletries, a few photographs of her parents that she couldn't bear to leave behind. The pregnancy test stayed in her purse. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of knowing. Let Jun-Seo sign those divorce papers thinking he was free and clear. Let him marry his precious Yoon-Ah and enjoy her father's money. Let him build his little empire on her family's connections. The truth would come out eventually. It always did. 20 minutes later, Soo-Min stood outside the apartment building, rain soaking through her thin coat. The November wind cut through her like a knife, and within minutes, she was shivering uncontrollably. She had nowhere to go. Her parents had died when she was young, her father in a car accident when she was 5, her mother from illness 2 years later. She had been raised by her mother's sister, Aunt Young-Mi, who had made it abundantly clear that Soo-Min was a burden she never wanted. The day Soo-Min turned 18, her aunt had handed her a small suitcase and told her not to come back. She had no savings. Everything had gone into Jun-Seo's startup, his dreams, his future, a future that apparently didn't include her. Every time she had suggested keeping some money aside for emergencies, he had convinced her that investing in his company was investing in their future together. What a fool she had been. She started walking, not knowing where she was going, just putting one foot in front of the other. The rain fell harder, plastering her hair to her face and soaking through to her skin. The city lights blurred around her, halos of color in the darkness, and she felt herself becoming invisible, just another faceless person in a sea of millions. Hours passed. Soo-Min lost track of time, lost track of where she was, lost track of everything except the cold seeping into her bones and the emptiness echoing in her chest. At some point the rain slowed to a drizzle, but she was already soaked through, her clothes heavy with water, her teeth chattering uncontrollably. Eventually, she found herself in a small park, a patch of green surrounded by towering buildings, with a few benches and a streetlight casting a weak golden glow. She sank onto a wet bench, too exhausted to care about the cold water seeping through her pants. She was so tired. Tired of fighting, tired of hoping, tired of trying to be good enough for people who would never see her worth. Maybe if she just closed her eyes for a moment. She pressed a hand to her stomach, feeling tears mix with the rain on her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the child that couldn't hear her. "I'm so sorry I can't give you better than this. I'm sorry I chose the wrong father for you. I'm sorry I wasn't smart enough or strong enough to see what he really was." The world began to spin, whether from cold, exhaustion, hunger, or emotional shock. Soo-Min felt herself tilting sideways on the bench. Her vision darkened at the edges, stars dancing in front of her eyes. The last thing she saw before consciousness slipped away was the headlights of a black car pulling up nearby. Then there was nothing at all. Soo-Min woke to warmth. That was the first thing she noticed, the blissful absence of cold. She was lying in a bed, a real bed with soft sheets and a thick blanket, and for a moment, she thought she was back in her apartment, that everything had been a nightmare. Then she opened her eyes and saw an unfamiliar white ceiling. A hospital room. She was in a hospital room. She tried to sit up, but her body felt weak, sluggish, as if she had been sleeping for days. Her throat was dry. Her head ached, and there was an IV line attached to her arm, clear fluid dripping slowly into her veins. "You're awake." The voice was male, deep, and unfamiliar. Soo-Min turned her head and saw a man sitting in a chair beside her bed. He was handsome in a severe way. Sharp features, dark hair swept back from his forehead, eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He wore an expensive suit, charcoal gray, perfectly tailored, with a white shirt and no tie. A luxury watch glinted at his wrist, and everything about him radiated power, wealth, and control. "Who are you?" Her voice came out as a croak. "Where am I?" "My name is Kang Tae-hyun," the man said. His tone was neutral, businesslike, but his eyes were watchful. "I found you unconscious in the park last night. You had severe hypothermia. Your body temperature had dropped to dangerous levels. The doctors said if I had been even an hour later, you might not have survived. Or the baby. The baby. He knew about the baby. The doctors confirmed your pregnancy," Tae-hyun continued, as if reading her thoughts. "About 8 weeks along. They said the hypothermia put significant stress on you both, but you should both be fine with rest and proper care." Soo-Min processed this information slowly, her thoughts moving through fog. A stranger had saved her life. A stranger in an expensive suit who looked like he belonged in a boardroom, not rescuing wet women from park benches in the middle of the night. "Why?" she asked. Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, that she would question his motives. "Does there need to be a reason to help someone in need?" "In my experience, yes." The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. "Rich men in expensive suits don't usually stop for homeless-looking women passed out in parks." Tae-hyun studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "You've had bad experiences with rich men. I've had bad experiences with men in general." Soo-Min looked away. "Thank you for bringing me to the hospital. I'll figure out how to pay for this and get out of your way." "The bill is already covered." He stood up, and she noticed how tall he was, well over 6 feet, with the broad shoulders of someone who stayed fit despite his obvious wealth. "And I have a proposal for you. I have a spare apartment in one of my buildings. Nothing extravagant, but clean and safe. You can stay there until you get back on your feet. No strings attached." Soo-Min laughed, a harsh, humorless sound that scraped her throat. "No strings attached? I wasn't born yesterday. No man offers a strange woman a free apartment without expecting something in return. You look like someone who's been hurt badly and expects the worst from everyone." Tae-hyun reached into his jacket and placed a business card on her bedside table. I'm not asking for anything. No strings, no expectations, no hidden agenda. If you don't want my help, that's your choice. But the offer stands." He turned to leave, and something made Soo-Min call out despite herself. "Wait." He paused at the door. "Why do you care? You don't know me. I could be a criminal, a con artist, anyone. Why would you help a complete stranger?" Taehyun glanced back at her, and for just a moment, his cold expression softened into something almost human. 10 years ago, someone helped me when I had nothing. I'm just paying it forward." He walked out before she could respond. Soo-Min stared at the business card for a long time. Kang Tae-hyun, CEO, Vanguard Holdings. The words seemed to blur and sharpen as she blinked at them. Vanguard Holdings. She had heard that name before. Everyone in Korea had. It was one of the largest conglomerates in the country, with interests in everything from real estate to technology to entertainment. They owned buildings across Seoul, tech companies that dominated the Asian market, entertainment agencies that produced some of the biggest stars in K-pop. This man wasn't just rich, he was one of the wealthiest, most powerful people in Asia. And he had personally found her in a park at night and brought her to a hospital. It didn't make sense. None of it made sense. She spent 3 more days in the hospital, recovering her strength and trying to figure out her next move. The doctors confirmed her pregnancy and gave her vitamins and instructions for prenatal care. They warned her about stress, about nutrition, about all the things she would need to do to ensure a healthy pregnancy. Everything they said felt surreal, like it was happening to someone else. She was going to be a mother. She was going to have a baby, and she had no home, no job, no money, and no one in the world who cared whether she lived or died, except apparently a billionaire CEO with mysterious motives. On the 3rd day, with nowhere else to go and her pride thoroughly broken by desperation, she called the number on Taehyun's card. "I'll take the apartment," she said when he answered, "but I'm paying you back. Every single one, as soon as I can find work." "That's fine." His voice betrayed no emotion, no triumph, nothing. "My assistant will pick you up from the hospital and get you settled." True to his word, a sleek black car arrived within the hour. The assistant, a no-nonsense woman in her 40s named Secretary Kim, with sharp eyes behind designer glasses, drove her to a beautiful apartment in Gangnam. It wasn't extravagant by the standards of someone like Taehyun, but it was more than Soo-Min had ever had in her life. 2 bedrooms, a modern kitchen with gleaming appliances, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering Seoul skyline. The floors were warm underfoot, heated, she realized, and the furniture was simple but elegant. "Mr. Kang has set up a stipend for your living expenses," Secretary Kim explained, handing her a bank card. "There will be a monthly deposit, enough for food, utilities, and basic needs. He's also arranged for you to see a doctor at Seoul General Hospital for your prenatal care, all expenses covered." "I didn't ask for any of this," Soo-Min said, overwhelmed. "I just needed somewhere to stay. I don't want charity." Secretary Kim's expression softened slightly. "Mr. Kang is particular about the people he chooses to help. He doesn't offer assistance lightly, and when he does it thoroughly. If he's decided to take care of you, it's best to just accept it. Arguing with him is pointless. I've been trying for 12 years. There was almost a hint of humor in her voice, and Soo-Min found herself relaxing slightly. "Why does he help people?" she asked. "He said something about paying it forward, but that's not my story to tell." Secretary Kim gathered her things. "But I will say this. Mr. Kang has never forgotten where he came from. And he has strong opinions about people who throw others away because they're inconvenient." Over the following weeks, Soo-Min tried to piece her life back together. She found a job at a small cafe near the apartment. Nothing glamorous, but honest work that allowed her to set her own hours around the increasing fatigue from her pregnancy. The owner, a kind elderly woman named Mrs. Park, had been sympathetic when Soo-Min explained she was pregnant and alone. "My daughter was in the same situation years ago," Mrs. Park had said, patting Soo-Min's hand. "Sometimes life gives us challenges we didn't expect. The important thing is how we face them." True to her word to Tae-hyun, Soo-Min set aside a portion of every paycheck to repay him, even though she knew it would take decades to pay back everything he had spent on her. The principle mattered, even if the math was impossible. She didn't see Tae-hyun often, maybe once every week or two, when he would stop by unannounced to check on her. He never stayed long, never asked personal questions, never made her feel indebted or uncomfortable. He would inquire about her health, ask if she needed anything, and then leave with a curt nod. But she caught him looking at her sometimes, when he thought she wasn't paying attention. There was something in his expression she couldn't quite read. Curiosity? Concern? Something else entirely? She didn't know what to make of him. He was a puzzle she couldn't solve. Meanwhile, across Seoul, the divorce papers arrived by courier. Soo-Min signed them without hesitation, sitting at the small table in her new apartment with a cup of tea growing cold beside her. She didn't ask for anything. No alimony, no division of assets, nothing. Jun-Seo could have his fresh start with his precious Yoon-Ah. She wanted nothing that tied her to him. There was one clause buried in the documents that Jun-Seo clearly hadn't read carefully, a clause about parental rights. In his eagerness to be free, he had signed away any claim to future children born within a year of the marriage. Soo-Min's lawyer, provided by Tae-hyun, though she had protested the expense, had been very thorough. The baby growing inside her was Jun-Seo's biologically. But legally, he would have no rights, no claim, no connection. If he ever found out about the child, it would already be too late. It was a small victory, but it was hers. She told herself she would figure out the rest later. Right now, she needed to focus on surviving, on getting stronger, on building something of her own. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that fate had much bigger plans for her than mere survival. 3 months passed. Soo-Min's pregnancy was progressing well, her stomach now showing a visible bump beneath her clothes. She had settled into a quiet routine. Work at the cafe, doctor's appointments, prenatal yoga classes she found for free at a community center, long walks through the city to clear her head and strengthen her body. She had stopped expecting anything from life, and in doing so, had found a strange kind of peace. She didn't hope for rescue or romance or miraculous change. She just focused on the next day, the next task, the next small step forward. Then one afternoon, a letter arrived that changed everything. It was delivered by courier, not regular mail, in a thick envelope made of expensive paper. It was addressed to her maiden name, Yoon-Soo-Min, which was strange, because no one used that name anymore. She had been Kang Soo-Min for 3 years, and even now, she usually just went by Soo-Min. The return address was a law firm she had never heard of, Park & Associates, Estate Law Division. Inside was a formal letter requesting her presence at a reading of a will. The will of Yoon Myung-hee. Soo-Min stared at the name, her heart pounding. Yoon Myung-hee had been her father's mother, her grandmother, who had reportedly died 30 years ago, long before Soo-Min was even born. Her father had never talked about his family, and when Soo-Min had asked questions as a child, he had always changed the subject. After he died, Soo-Min had assumed there was no one left. But according to this letter, Yoon Myung-hee had died just 3 months ago, at the age of 92, and she had named Soo-Min as her sole heir. "There must be some mistake," Soo-Min said when she showed the letter to Secretary Kim, who had become something of a friend during the past months. "I never even knew this woman existed. My father said his mother died before I was born." Secretary Kim read through the documents, her expression growing more serious with each page. Her eyebrows rose, then rose higher, and by the time she finished, she was looking at Soo-Min with something like shock. "Miss Yoon, do you know who your grandmother was?" No. My father never talked about her. I always assumed there was some family falling out. Yoon Myung-hee was the founder and chairman of Taewon Group. The words didn't register at first. Soo-Min blinked at her, uncomprehending. Taewon, the pharmaceutical company? Taewon isn't just a pharmaceutical company. Secretary Kim's voice was careful, measured. It's one of the oldest and most powerful conglomerates in Korea. Pharmaceuticals, yes, but also hotels, shipping, technology, real estate. It was founded in 1952 and has been family-owned ever since. And you're saying my grandmother was the chairman for 40 years after her husband passed? She only stepped down a decade ago due to declining health, but she retained controlling shares. Secretary Kim looked up at Soo-Min with something like awe in her usually unflappable expression. Miss Yoon, if these documents are legitimate, you just inherited a controlling stake in a company worth over $50 billion. Soo-Min sat down heavily on the couch. Her hands were shaking. The letter trembled in her grip. This had to be a scam, a mistake. A cruel joke played by a universe that had done nothing but hurt her. Women like her didn't become billionaires overnight. That was the stuff of fairy tales and melodramas, not real life. But when she went to the law firm the next day, accompanied by Secretary Kim and, to her surprise, Tae-hyun himself, who had insisted on coming when he heard about the letter, she learned that it was all true. Her father, Yoon Jin-ho, had been the only son of Yoon Myung-hee, but he had been disowned 40 years ago for marrying a woman the family considered beneath him, Soo-Min's mother, Lee Sun-hee, a simple elementary school teacher with no family connections or wealth. He had been given a choice, the family or the woman. He had chosen love. He changed his name, severed all ties with Taewon, and built a quiet life with the woman he loved. They hadn't been rich, but they had been happy, at least until the accident took him away. He had died when Soo-Min was 5, and her mother had followed 2 years later, weakened by grief and illness. Soo-Min had been sent to live with her mother's only living relative, Aunt Jung-mi, a woman who had resented the burden from the start and made Soo-Min's childhood miserable. All those years of struggle, all those years of poverty, of being told she was worthless, of scraping by on minimum wage and marrying a man who saw her as disposable. And she had been the granddaughter of one of the richest women in Asia the entire time. Your grandmother spent the last 30 years searching for you, the lawyer explained. He was an elderly man with kind eyes and a gentle voice, clearly moved by the story he was telling. After your father's death, she regretted the estrangement deeply. She blamed herself for driving him away with her pride and stubbornness. She hired investigators, but your aunt had moved several times, and the records were incomplete. Your aunt was also uncooperative when investigators made contact. Uncooperative. That was a polite way of putting it. Soo-Min could easily imagine Aunt Jung-mi slamming the door in the face of anyone who might improve her niece's circumstances. Your grandmother only found you 6 months ago, the lawyer continued. By then you were already married, living under a different name. She was planning to reach out, to invite you to meet her. Then why didn't she? Soo-Min demanded, tears streaming down her face. If she was looking for me all this time, why didn't she come find me herself? She was already very ill by then, cancer advanced stage. She wanted to see you more than anything, but her health declined rapidly. In the end, she passed away before a meeting could be arranged. The lawyer handed her a sealed envelope, thick with age but carefully preserved. She left this letter for you. She wrote it in her final weeks. Soo-Min opened it with trembling hands. My dear granddaughter, if you're reading this, then I have passed from this world without ever having the chance to hold you in my arms, to tell you how much I love you, to apologize for all the years we lost. I cannot tell you how deeply that grieves me. Your father was the greatest joy of my life, and when I drove him away with my pride and stubbornness, I lost everything that truly mattered. I told myself I was protecting the family, protecting the company, protecting traditions that seemed so important at the time. But traditions mean nothing if they cost us the people we love. I spent decades trying to atone for that mistake. Every night, I prayed that I would find you. Every morning, I woke hoping today would be the day. And when I finally learned where you were, when I finally saw your photograph for the first time, you look so much like your father. The same gentle eyes, the same determined chin. I wept for an hour. I can only hope that by leaving you everything I have, I can give you the life you deserve. I have watched from afar as you struggled, as you married, as you worked so hard for so little. I wanted to intervene so many times, but I was afraid. Afraid you wouldn't want anything to do with the family that had caused your father so much pain. Afraid you would reject me as I once rejected him. In the end, I was a coward. I waited too long, and time ran out. You are a Yoon by blood. This empire was built by your ancestors, and now it belongs to you. Do not let anyone make you feel less than what you are. You come from a line of warriors, survivors, and builders. Your great-grandmother survived the war with nothing and built a business from scratch. Your grandmother turned that business into an empire. And now it is your turn. Let that strength guide you. It is in your blood, even if you don't know it yet. I am sorry I could not be there to teach you, to protect you, to love you as a grandmother should. But I will be watching over you, always. And I have arranged for people to help you. People I trust, who will support you as you learn to navigate this new world. You are not alone, my darling. You were never alone, even when you felt that way. I was always there, thinking of you, loving you, hoping for you. Live well, be happy, and know that your grandmother loved you until her very last breath. With all my heart, your grandmother, Yoon Myung-hee. Soo-Min couldn't stop the sobs that shook her body. A grandmother who had loved her, searched for her, wanted her, and she had never known. All those years of feeling alone, unwanted, worthless, and there had been someone out there who would have given her the world. Taehyun was by her side in an instant, his hand warm and steady on her shoulder. "It's okay," he said quietly, his voice gentler than she had ever heard it. "Take all the time you need." "I don't understand," she whispered, the words torn from somewhere deep inside her. "Why is this happening now? After everything I've been through? Why couldn't she have found me sooner, before I married Jun-Seo, before I was thrown out like garbage? Sometimes the universe has a strange sense of timing." His voice was soft. "But maybe this is your second chance, Soo-Min. A chance to become who you were always meant to be." She looked up at him through her tears, seeing something in his expression she hadn't noticed before. Understanding, compassion, and something deeper that she wasn't ready to name. If this revelation touched you even a fraction of how it touched Soo-Min, then you're going to want to see what happens next. Subscribe to the channel to follow her journey. Now, let's see how this inheritance changes everything. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of lawyers, meetings, and revelations. Soo-Min was introduced to the Taiwan Board of Directors as the new majority shareholder and chairwoman-in-waiting. The reactions ranged from shocked to skeptical to openly hostile. Who was this nobody who had appeared out of nowhere to claim one of Korea's greatest fortunes? Director Hwang, a man in his 60s who had been positioning himself for years to take control after the old chairwoman's death, barely concealed his contempt. "With all due respect," he said at her first board meeting, his tone suggesting no respect at all. "The company cannot be run by someone with no experience. Perhaps Ms. Yoon would prefer to take a dividend and leave the actual management to those of us who know what we're doing." There were murmurs of agreement around the table. Soo-Min felt the weight of their judgment, their dismissal, pressing down on her. But she had learned something in the months since Jun-Seo threw her out. She had learned that the only person she could truly rely on was herself. She had learned that being underestimated was not a weakness, but an advantage. She had learned that the quiet, gentle, accommodating version of herself had gotten her nothing but pain. That version was gone now, replaced by something stronger. "With all due respect, Director Huang," she said, her voice steady, "I am not asking for your permission. I am the majority shareholder. This company belonged to my grandmother, built by my family, and now it belongs to me. I will be taking an active role in management. Not eventually. Not when you deem me ready. But now." She looked around the table, meeting each pair of eyes in turn. "I know you think I'm just some poor girl who got lucky. I know you're already planning how to push me out, how to manipulate me, how to take what's mine. So let me be clear. My grandmother chose me for a reason, and I intend to honor her legacy by learning this business inside and out, and by removing anyone who tries to undermine me." The room was silent. "Now," she continued, opening the folder in front of her, "I'd like to discuss the quarterly reports. I've noticed some discrepancies in the pharmaceutical division's R&D spending that I'd like explained." The look of shock on Director Huang's face was almost worth everything she had been through. That night, Taehyun took her to dinner to celebrate, if celebrate was the right word for her hostile takeover of her own inheritance. "You were magnificent today," he said, raising a glass of sparkling water in her direction. She couldn't drink alcohol because of the pregnancy, but he had ordered the same. The look on Huang's face when you asked about the R&D discrepancies. "He's been embezzling," Soo-Min said matter-of-factly. "I found it in my grandmother's private files. She knew about it but was too ill to deal with it. He's been siphoning money into a shell company for years." "You found that already?" "I've been doing nothing but studying for the past 3 weeks." She smiled slightly. "What else was I going to do? Watch television? I have a company to run." Taehyun looked at her with that unreadable expression again, the one that seemed to contain multitudes but revealed nothing. "You've changed," he observed, "from the woman I found in the park. That woman was broken." Soo-Min set down her glass. "I had to become someone new, someone stronger. I have a baby coming, a company to run, and a world full of people like Director Huang who want to see me fail." She met his eyes. "I don't have the luxury of being weak anymore." "You were never weak," Taehyun said softly. "You just hadn't discovered your own strength yet." Something passed between them in that moment, an acknowledgement, an understanding. They had grown closer over the past months, their relationship evolving from benefactor and beneficiary to something more like equals. Friends, perhaps, or something with the potential to become more. But Soo-Min wasn't ready to think about that yet. She had too much else to focus on. Meanwhile, across Seoul, Jun-Seo's life was falling apart. The investment from Yoon-Ah's father had come through, but with strings attached that Jun-Seo hadn't anticipated. Hanjin Corporation didn't want a partnership. They wanted control. Yoon-Ah's father had installed his own people in key positions. And Jun-Seo found himself increasingly marginalized in the company he had built from nothing. Every decision had to be approved by Hanjin representatives. Every meeting included people who reported directly to Yoon-Ah's father. Every time Jun-Seo tried to assert himself, he was reminded, subtly or not so subtly, of where the money really came from. He had traded his freedom for funding, and now he was little more than a figurehead in his own company. Worse, Yoon-Ah was not the woman he remembered. The sweet, gentle girl he had fallen in love with in college, the one who had written him love letters and cried when they had to separate, had been replaced by someone calculating, demanding, and never satisfied. She criticized everything about him. His clothes were too cheap. His apartment was too small. His friends were too common. Nothing was ever good enough. "Why can't you dress like a proper CEO?" she would snap, examining his suits with disdain. My father's executives don't look like they bought their clothes at a department store. This suit cost 2,000,001, Jun-Seo would protest, and it shows. You should be wearing custom tailoring. What will people think when they see you next to me? She was obsessed with status, with appearances, with maintaining her position in Seoul's social hierarchy. Every dinner had to be at the right restaurant. Every party had to be the right party. Every interaction was calculated for maximum social benefit. Jun-Seo found himself missing Soo-Min, her simple pleasures, her genuine smile, the way she had looked at him like he was everything, not like he was a stepping stone. But he had thrown that away. He had made his choice. Did you hear about the new chairwoman of Taewang? Yoon-Ah asked him one evening, scrolling through her phone while they ate dinner in near silence. Everyone is talking about her, some long-lost heir who appeared out of nowhere. Can you imagine? One day you're a nobody. The next, you're worth billions. Jun-Seo grunted, not really listening. He was thinking about the quarterly projections, about the Hanjin board meeting next week, about all the ways his life had gone wrong. Apparently, she was working at some bakery before this happened, Yoon-Ah continued. Can you imagine? A bakery worker becoming one of the richest women in Korea. It's like a drama. Something in her words nagged at Jun-Seo's attention, but he couldn't place it. There's going to be a gala next month to welcome her to society, Yoon-Ah said. My father got us invitations. It's a perfect networking opportunity. Everyone who matters will be there. You should try to look presentable. Sure, Jun-Seo said. Whatever you want. He had stopped fighting with her. What was the point? He had traded everything for this life, and now he had to live with it. 6 months had passed since that rainy night when Soo-Min was thrown out of her home. She stood in front of the mirror in her penthouse apartment. A real penthouse now, one of the finest in Seoul, with views that stretched across the entire city. She hardly recognized the woman looking back at her. That woman was elegant, poised, radiating quiet power. Her hair had been professionally styled, falling in soft waves over her shoulders. Her clothes were designer, not ostentatious, but unmistakably expensive. Her makeup was subtle and sophisticated, and her eyes held a sharpness, a knowing quality that hadn't been there 6 months ago. But none of that mattered as much as the small, perfect weight in her arms. Her daughter, Yoon-Ah, was 3 months old now. Born healthy despite everything Soo-Min had endured during her pregnancy. Born with her father's eyes, dark and deep, and her mother's stubborn chin. Born into a world that had been cruel to her mother, but would bow before her daughter. You are going to have everything, Soo-Min whispered to the sleeping baby, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. Everything I never had. Every opportunity, every advantage, every protection I can give you. And no one will ever make you feel worthless. I'll make sure of it. Tonight was the gala, her official introduction to society as the chairwoman of Taewang Group. She had prepared for this moment for months, studying names and faces, memorizing connections and rivalries, identifying potential allies and definite enemies. This was her debut, her statement, her declaration to the world that she was not someone to be underestimated. What she didn't know was that someone from her past would be there. The Grand Hyatt Seoul glittered like a jewel box in the November night. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light across a ballroom filled with Korea's elite. CEOs of major corporations, politicians with perfectly practiced smiles, celebrities dripping in diamonds, and old money families who had ruled this world for generations. The women wore gowns that cost more than most Koreans made in a year. The men wore suits tailored in Milan and London. The air smelled of expensive perfume and barely concealed ambition. Soo-Min arrived on Taehyun's arm. They weren't together, not officially, but somewhere along the way, their relationship had evolved into something deeper than friendship. He had been there for her through the most difficult months of her life, never asking for anything, always supporting her. believing in her when she didn't believe in herself. She had fallen for him gradually, like sunrise rather than lightning, and she knew he felt the same way, even if neither of them had spoken the words out loud. Tonight, in a crimson gown that made her look like a queen of fire and ice, with rubies glittering at her ears and throat, she was ready to face the world. The announcer's voice rang through the ballroom. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Chairwoman Soo-Min of Taewon Group, accompanied by CEO Kang Tae-hyun of Vanguard Holdings." Every head in the room turned toward the entrance. A wave of whispers rippled through the crowd, some curious, some skeptical, some openly resentful. Soo-Min felt their eyes on her like a physical weight, their judgment pressing against her from all sides. But she didn't flinch. She had survived worse than judgment. She had survived abandonment, betrayal, near death. A room full of rich people staring at her was nothing. She descended the grand staircase on Taehyun's arm, her head held high, her expression serene, her movements graceful. Every step was deliberate. Every moment was calculated. This was her statement, her declaration, her announcement to the world that the poor bakery worker they had all dismissed was now one of the most powerful women in Korea. Halfway across the ballroom, she stopped, because standing 30 feet away, champagne glass frozen midway to his lips, face pale as death, was Jun-Seo. And beside him, wearing a designer dress that somehow looked cheap compared to the gowns around her, was Yoon-Ah. Jun-Seo's eyes were wide, disbelieving, fixed on Soo-Min like he was seeing a ghost rise from the grave. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. His champagne glass tilted dangerously, threatening to spill. "No," he finally whispered, the word barely audible. That's impossible. That's not... It can't be." Yoon-Ah followed his gaze, her brow furrowing in confusion. Then her expression transformed from bored superiority to naked shock, her carefully maintained composure cracking like thin ice. "Wait, isn't that your ex-wife, the bakery worker? But why is she..." She couldn't finish the sentence, because the woman standing across the ballroom, the one in the stunning crimson gown, the one dripping in rubies, the one on the arm of one of Asia's most powerful CEOs, the one everyone was whispering about, was Soo-Min. The same Soo-Min that Jun-Seo had thrown out of their apartment like garbage. The same Soo-Min that Yoon-Ah had dismissed as a worthless placeholder. But this couldn't be the same person. The Soo-Min they knew was small, quiet, ordinary. She worked at a bakery. She wore second-hand clothes. She had no family, no connections, no power. This woman looked like she had been born to rule empires. Soo-Min saw them too. Of course she did. She had spotted them the moment she entered the room. Part of her had hoped this moment would come, had planned for it, had imagined exactly what she would say and how she would say it. But another part of her felt something unexpected. Nothing at all. Looking at Jun-Seo now, at his pale face and trembling hands, at the way Yoon-Ah was gripping his arm with her talons, at the fear and confusion in his eyes, she didn't feel anger or hate or even satisfaction. She just felt empty, like he was a stranger she had met once, long ago, in another life. He didn't matter anymore. He hadn't mattered for a long time. Tae-hyun noticed her pause and followed her gaze. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Is that him? The ex-husband?" "Yes. Do you want to leave?" Soo-Min considered it for exactly 1 second. Then she smiled, a cold, beautiful smile that would have made her grandmother proud. "No. I want to say hello. I've earned that much, don't you think?" She walked toward them with Tae-hyun at her side, and she could see the exact moment panic set in on Jun-Seo's face. He looked like he wanted to run, to disappear, to be anywhere but here. But Yoon-Ah was gripping his arm with a force that would probably leave bruises, and running would have caused an even bigger scene. "Jun-Seo," Soo-Min's voice was pleasant, conversational, as if they were old acquaintances meeting at a casual gathering, rather than a woman confronting the man who had destroyed her life. It's been a while. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. Soo-Min, I didn't expect to see you here. No? She tilted her head slightly, a gesture of innocent curiosity. Where did you expect to see me? Still working at the bakery? Living in some tiny apartment somewhere? Crying over what I lost? Struggling to survive on the streets where you left me? She let the questions hang in the air for a moment, watching the color drain further from his face. I'm afraid I've been rather busy, she continued lightly, taking over a $50 billion company, learning to run an empire, that sort of thing. Yoon-Ah finally found her voice, though it came out higher and more strained than her usual affected elegance. How are you? She gestured vaguely at Soo-Min's gown, her jewelry, Taehyun standing beside her like a bodyguard, and a declaration all at once. How am I chairwoman of Taewon Group? Soo-Min smiled sweetly, showing her teeth. Family connections. It turns out my grandmother was Yoon Myung-hee. You might have heard of her. She founded a little company called Taewon about 70 years ago. She watched the blood drain from Yoon-Ah's face with a satisfaction she didn't bother to hide. Oh, and speaking of family connections. Soo-Min's smile sharpened. The same grandmother, by the way, held a 40% stake in Hanjin Corporation's pharmaceutical division through a subsidiary. My pharmaceutical division now. She paused, letting the implications sink in. Your father's company, Yoon-Ah, the one that invested in Jun-Seo's little startup. Yoon-Ah's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Don't worry, Soo-Min continued, her tone reassuring in a way that was obviously anything but. I have no intention of interfering with Hanjin's business, unless, of course, they give me a reason to. But I'm sure that won't happen. After all, we're practically family now, aren't we? The silence that followed was thick enough to cut with a knife. Around them, the other guests were doing a very poor job of pretending not to listen, their whispered speculation spreading through the ballroom like wildfire. Soo-Min, Jun-Seo's voice cracked, rough with emotion. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what I did to you. I was wrong. I was stupid. You were exactly who you always were. Soo-Min cut him off, her tone still pleasant but her eyes hard as diamonds. A weak man who makes decisions based on convenience, not integrity. A man who sees people as stepping stones rather than human beings. A man who threw away 3 years of marriage for money and connections. She took a step closer, and something in her expression made Jun-Seo take an involuntary step back. You didn't love me, Jun-Seo. You never did. I was just useful to you until someone more useful came along. But that's all right, because I don't need your love anymore. I don't need anything from you. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over him like a funeral shroud. There is one thing you should know, though. Soo-Min pulled out her phone and showed him a photograph. A baby with dark eyes and chubby cheeks, sleeping peacefully in a pink blanket, tiny fists curled beside her face. Her name is Yoon-Ha. She's 3 months old. Soo-Min's voice softened, genuine warmth entering it for the first time. She's perfect, healthy, happy, loved beyond measure. Her eyes hardened again as she looked at Jun-Seo. And yes, she's yours. The color that had returned to Jun-Seo's face drained away again. I have a daughter? I'm a father? You donated genetic material, Soo-Min corrected coldly. That's all. She is my daughter, Jun-Seo. Mine alone. She will carry my family name, inherit my family's legacy, grow up surrounded by people who actually love her. She will never know your name, never know what you did, never be tainted by your weakness and selfishness. You can't do that, Yoon-Ah shrieked, forgetting herself entirely. He has rights, That child is heir to nothing you can touch, Soo-Min interrupted, ice in her voice. Jun-Seo signed away his parental rights in our divorce agreement. Remember, Jun-Seo? You were so eager to be free of me, so desperate to marry your precious first love, that you signed the papers without reading the fine print. She smiled, a cold and terrible smile. My lawyer was very thorough. The silence that followed was deafening. Jun-Seo looked like he was about to collapse. His hands were shaking. Tears were forming in his eyes. Whether from grief, regret, or shock, Soo-Min neither knew nor cared. Yoon-Ah was gripping his arm so hard her perfectly manicured nails were probably drawing blood through his suit jacket. And around them, the whispers had grown into barely concealed chatter. By tomorrow, this story would be all over Seoul's social circles. The cheating husband, the abandoned wife who became a billionaire, the child he would never know. I think we're done here, Soo-Min said, turning to Taehyun. I believe I promised to introduce you to the Minister of Trade. With pleasure. He offered her his arm, and together they walked away, leaving Jun-Seo and Yoon-Ah standing in the wreckage of their own humiliation. Behind them, Soo-Min heard Yoon-Ah's voice rising in accusation. You have a child with her? You threw away your daughter for me? You told me she meant nothing to you. And Jun-Seo's pathetic response, I didn't know. She never told me. How was I supposed to? She didn't look back. The rest of the gala passed in a blur of introductions, business cards, and carefully calculated conversations. Soo-Min smiled, shook hands, discussed potential partnerships, and established herself as a force to be reckoned with in Seoul's business community. But her mind kept returning to the confrontation with Jun-Seo, to the look on his face when he realized what he had lost, to the way Yoon-Ah's perfect composure had shattered like glass. It should have felt better than it did. When the night finally ended, and she was alone with Taehyun in his car, she let out a breath she felt like she had been holding for 6 months. Are you okay? He asked, his voice soft with concern. Better than okay. She looked out the window at the city lights streaming past. I've been carrying that anger for so long, planning what I would say, imagining how it would feel. But tonight, it's gone. I finally said everything I needed to say, and now I can move on. He doesn't deserve your forgiveness. This isn't about forgiveness. She turned to look at him. It's about freedom. He has no power over me anymore. He's not the man who broke me. He's just nothing. A nobody. Someone I used to know. Taehyun reached over and took her hand. His fingers were warm, strong, gentle. You were magnificent tonight. The way you handled that confrontation. I've never seen anything like it. I had a good teacher. She squeezed his hand back. Thank you, Taehyun, for everything. For finding me. For believing in me. For giving me a chance to become someone new. She felt tears prick at her eyes. I don't know what I would have done without you. Probably exactly what you did. Survive, rebuild, succeed. His voice was firm with conviction. You didn't need me, Soo-Min. You just needed to believe in yourself. They drove in comfortable silence for a while, the city lights painting patterns across the windows. Then Taehyun suddenly spoke again. There's something I've been wanting to tell you. His voice was unusually hesitant. Something I should have said a long time ago. Soo-Min's heart beat a little faster. What is it? He pulled the car over to the side of the road and turned to face her. In the dim light, his eyes were intense, vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. The night I found you in the park. It wasn't an accident. I had been following you. Soo-Min stared at him. What? Not like that. He held up a hand. I wasn't stalking you. I was looking for you. Because I knew who you were, or who you were supposed to be. I don't understand. Taehyun took a deep breath. Your father and my father were best friends 30 years ago. When your father was disowned from the Yoon family, mine was the only one who stood by him. They stayed in contact secretly for years, letters, phone calls, even occasional visits when my father traveled for business. But my father never mentioned. He was protecting you. He knew the Yoon family might try to use you as leverage, might try to hurt you to get to him. So he kept that part of his life completely separate. Taehyun's voice grew rougher. My father passed away 2 years ago, and when I was going through his papers, I found a box of letters from your father, and a photograph of you as a child, maybe 4 years old, with a note on the back. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a faded photograph. A little girl with pigtails and a gap-toothed smile, sitting on someone's shoulders, laughing at the camera. If anything happens to me, Taehyun recited from memory, please find my daughter and protect her. She is my everything. Soo-Min took the photograph with trembling hands. She remembered this day, vaguely, like a dream. Her father had taken her to the park. They had eaten ice cream. He had told her she was his favorite person in the whole world. You've been looking for me? She whispered. Because of a note from 30 years ago? For 6 months. Taehyun's eyes were bright with emotion. I hired investigators, searched through records, tracked down anyone who might know where you were. I finally found your trail the same day you were thrown out of your apartment. His voice grew thick. I was on my way to meet you properly when I saw you collapse in that park. I thought I was too late. I thought I had failed to keep my father's promise. You saved my life. I did what your father asked mine to do. I kept his promise. Soo-Min was crying now, tears streaming down her face. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming realization that even in her darkest moments, she had never been truly alone. Her father had loved her enough to plan for her protection. Taehyun's father had honored that promise across decades. And Taehyun himself had searched for her, found her, saved her. Not for money or power or advantage, but because it was the right thing to do. But what about... She struggled to find words through her tears. What about us? Everything between us. Was it just because of some promise? Some obligation? Taehyun reached out and gently wiped the tears from her cheeks. The promise was why I looked for you. It was why I brought you to the hospital, why I gave you the apartment, why I stayed involved in the beginning. He leaned closer, his forehead almost touching hers. But everything after that, every conversation, every late night, every moment I spent watching you grow stronger and more brilliant, that was because of you. Because you're extraordinary, Soo-Min. Because you're the most remarkable person I've ever met. His voice dropped to a whisper. Because I love you. Not because of any promise or obligation, but because I couldn't stop myself if I tried. Soo-Min didn't answer with words. She kissed him instead, a kiss that said everything she couldn't express. Years of loneliness and pain and hopelessness finally giving way to hope and love and the promise of a future she had never dared to imagine. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Taehyun smiled. A real smile. The first truly unguarded one she had ever seen from him. So, he said, what happens now? Soo-Min looked at him. This man who had been her savior, her mentor, her friend, and now something infinitely more. Now, she said, we build something together. Something real. And the past, your ex-husband, Yoon-Ah, everything that happened. She thought about it for a moment. The past is exactly where it belongs, behind me. Jun-Seo and Yoon-Ah will face their own consequences. Her family will never look at her the same way after tonight. His reputation in business circles is destroyed. They'll tear each other apart without any help from me. She smiled. Not the cold, calculating smile from the gala, but a genuine one, full of peace. That's the beauty of karma. You don't have to lift a finger. You just have to wait. And she was right. Within a year, everything had changed. Hanjin Corporation, embarrassed by the public scandal involving their daughter and the revelation that her fiancé had abandoned his pregnant wife, withdrew their investment from Jun-Seo's company. The withdrawal was quiet but absolute. No explanation given, no negotiation offered. Without Hanjin's money and connections, Jun-Seo's startup collapsed within months. The investors he had been courting, who had been impressed by his association with Hanjin, suddenly stopped returning his calls. Partners he had counted on backed out. Employees who had believed in his vision resigned in droves. He lost everything: his company, his reputation, his home, his future. The last Soo-Min heard, he was working as a low-level manager at a small tech firm, earning a fraction of what he had once made, living in a tiny apartment on the outskirts of Seoul. As for Yoon-Ah, her father had been furious about the public humiliation at the gala. She had been sent away to a distant relative in the countryside, officially to recover from the stress. But everyone knew the truth. Her dreams of marrying a successful businessman and becoming a society queen had shattered. Jun-Seo and Yoon-Ah had turned on each other almost immediately after the gala. She blamed him for hiding his child. He blamed her for pushing him to rush the divorce. Their relationship, built on convenience and ambition rather than love, hadn't survived the first real test. Soo-Min didn't feel sorry for them. She didn't feel anything at all. And that, she had learned, was the greatest revenge. Not anger, not hatred, but complete and utter indifference. Because by then, she had everything she had ever wanted. She had Ha-Yun, who was growing into a bright, curious toddler with her mother's determination and her grandmother's fierce spirit. Ha-Yun took her first steps in the garden of their new estate, said her first words, an emphatic "Mama," and wrapped everyone she met around her tiny finger. She had Taewon Group, which she had transformed from a traditional, conservative conglomerate into an innovative leader in sustainable technology and ethical business practices. Under her leadership, the company had grown by 30% and was being praised in business journals around the world. She had Tae-hyun, who had become her partner in every sense of the word, in business, in life, in building a future together. He had proposed 6 months after that night in the car, getting down on one knee in the same park where he had found her dying in the rain. "This is where everything changed," he had said. "This is where I found you. And I want to spend the rest of my life making sure you never feel alone again." She had said yes through tears of joy. And she had herself, the strongest, truest version of herself that she had never known existed. Not the quiet, accommodating woman who had let herself be dismissed and discarded. Not the broken shell who had collapsed in a rainstorm, but someone new. Someone who knew her own worth. Someone who would never let anyone make her feel worthless again. On their wedding day, 2 years after that fateful night in the park, Soo-Min stood at the altar in a white gown that seemed to glow under the lights. Ha-Yun, now a precocious 2-year-old, was carried down the aisle by Secretary Kim, throwing flower petals everywhere and giggling with delight. When Tae-hyun took her hands, his eyes were bright with emotion. "Ready?" he asked. "I've been ready my whole life," she answered. "I just didn't know it until I met you." The ceremony was beautiful, attended by hundreds of guests, covered by media outlets, praised as the wedding of the year. But none of that mattered to Soo-Min. All that mattered was the man standing in front of her, the daughter in the front row, and the life they were building together. After the vows were exchanged and they were pronounced husband and wife, Tae-hyun leaned in to kiss her. As their lips met, cheers erupted throughout the hall. "I love you, Mrs. Kang," he whispered against her mouth. "I love you too." She smiled. "Although I'm keeping my name professionally, Yoon Soo-Min has a certain ring to it now. Wouldn't have it any other way." They walked back up the aisle together, Ha-Yun now in Soo-Min's arms, waving at the guests like a tiny princess. And as they stepped out into the sunlight, Soo-Min looked back at the journey that had brought her here. A woman thrown out of her own home like garbage. A stranger's kindness in the rain. A grandmother's love reaching across decades. A company built on her ancestors' dreams. A daughter born into a world that would kneel at her feet. She had been broken once. Shattered into pieces on a cold November night, lying in a park in the rain, ready to give up on everything. But she had rebuilt herself, piece by piece, into something stronger and more beautiful than before. And now, finally, she was whole. As the wedding guests flooded out to congratulate them, Soo-Min noticed a figure standing at the very edge of the crowd. A man, thin and worn, watching from a distance with hollow eyes and slumped shoulders. Jun-Seo. He hadn't been invited. Of course he hadn't. But somehow he had found out about the wedding, and somehow he had come to watch the woman he had thrown away marry someone who actually deserved her. Their eyes met across the crowd. Soo-Min expected to feel something. Anger, triumph, satisfaction, vindication. But all she felt was pity. He looked like a man who had lost everything and knew he had no one to blame but himself. A man haunted by his own choices, destroyed by his own selfishness, left with nothing but regret. She nodded once, a small acknowledgement, nothing more, and then turned away. She had no more time for the past. Her future was waiting. As she walked into the reception on her husband's arm, her daughter laughing in her other arm, she heard Tae-hyun whisper, "Who was that man by the gate?" "No one important," she answered. "Just a ghost from another life." And that was the truth. Jun-Seo was nothing now, just a cautionary tale. A reminder of what happens when you throw away something precious because you're too blind to see its value. The reception was full of joy and laughter, toasts and dancing, love and celebration. Ha-yoon fell asleep in her grandmother's arms, Tae-hyun's mother, who had welcomed Soo-Min into the family with open arms and already spoiled Ha-yeon rotten. When the evening finally wound down and the last guest departed, Soo-Min and Tae-hyun stood on the balcony of their new home, a beautiful estate outside Seoul that they would fill with love and life, and eventually more children to join Ha-yeon. "So," Tae-hyun said, wrapping his arms around her from behind, "any regrets?" Soo-Min thought about the question seriously. Regrets. She had lost 3 years of her life to a man who never valued her. She had been thrown out of her home while pregnant and alone. She had nearly died in a rainstorm in a park, abandoned by everyone she had trusted. But every one of those experiences had led her here. Every tear she had cried, every hardship she had faced, had been shaping her into the woman she was always meant to be, had been preparing her to take her place as the heir to the Yoon legacy, had been teaching her to rely on herself, to find her own strength, to never let anyone else define her worth. "Not a single one," she said, because that was the truth of it. Jun-Seo had tried to throw her away like garbage, but in doing so, he had set her free. Free to discover her true heritage, free to find her true strength, free to build a life beyond anything she had ever imagined. And that was the greatest revenge of all. Not destruction, but transformation. Not hatred, but complete and utter indifference. Not clinging to the past, but embracing a future so bright that the past became nothing more than a shadow. Soo-Min leaned back into her husband's embrace and watched the stars appear one by one over Seoul. Somewhere in the city below, Jun-Seo was probably drowning his sorrows, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. But up here, on this balcony, in this moment, everything was exactly right. She smiled and closed her eyes. Tomorrow, there would be challenges. Boardroom battles and business decisions. The endless juggling act of being a mother and a CEO and a wife. But tonight, there was only peace. Tonight, there was only love. Tonight, there was everything she had ever wanted. And as the night wrapped around them like a blanket, Soo-Min whispered a silent thank you to everyone who had brought her to this moment. Her grandmother, who had searched for her until the very end. Her father, who had loved her enough to plan for her protection. Taehyun's father, who had kept a promise across 30 years. And Taehyun himself, who had found her in her darkest hour and helped her find the light. She had been thrown out of her home by a man who didn't know what he had. And in losing everything, she had found so much more. That is the power of a woman who refuses to stay broken. That is the story of Soo-Min. The story doesn't end there, of course. Life continued, as it always does, bringing new challenges and new joys. Ha-yoon grew up surrounded by love, attending the best schools, learning multiple languages, and developing the same fierce determination that had carried her mother through the darkest times. When she was old enough to understand, Soo-Min told her daughter the truth about her biological father, not to hurt her, but to teach her about the importance of choosing partners who would value her for who she was, not what they could gain from her. Your biological father made choices, Soo-Min explained gently. Those choices hurt us, but they also led us to your real father, the one who chose us, who loved us, who built this family with me. That's what matters. Ha-yoon had nodded solemnly, wise beyond her years. So sometimes bad things lead to good things? Sometimes, Soo-Min agreed, if you're strong enough to keep going. Taewon Group continued to thrive under Soo-Min's leadership. She pioneered new ethical business practices, invested heavily in green technology, and established a foundation in her grandmother's name that helped young women from difficult backgrounds pursue education and careers in business. Every scholarship recipient received a letter from Soo-Min herself, telling them the same thing she wished someone had told her years ago. Your circumstances do not define your worth. Your potential is limitless, and there will always be people in your corner, even when you can't see them. Taehyun remained her partner in everything. Her husband, her advisor, her best friend, and eventually the father of 2 more children who joined Ha-yoon in filling their home with noise and laughter and love. They never took their happiness for granted. Every anniversary, they returned to that park where everything had changed, where Soo-Min had collapsed in the rain, where Taehyun had found her, where their story had truly begun. Do you ever wonder what would have happened? Taehyun asked her one such anniversary, standing beside the bench where he had found her unconscious. If I hadn't been there that night. Soo-Min considered the question. I think about it sometimes, but I choose not to dwell on the what-ifs. I choose to focus on what is. She looked around at the park, at the streetlight that had guided Taehyun to her, at the bench that had been her lowest point, at the path that now led to the life she had built. I was broken that night, she said softly, but broken things can be rebuilt. And sometimes when you rebuild them, they become even stronger than before. Taehyun pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. Have I told you lately that you're extraordinary? Only every day. She smiled up at him. And have I told you lately that I love you? Only every minute. They stood there together as the sun set over Seoul. 2 people who had found each other against all odds, who had built something beautiful from the ruins of pain and betrayal. Behind them, the city sparkled with 1,000,000 lights, each one representing someone struggling, someone hoping, someone fighting their own battles. And Soo-Min sent out a silent wish to all of them. May you find your strength. May you find your people. May you rise from whatever ashes life has made of your dreams. Because if a woman thrown out of her own home by her cheating husband could become one of the most powerful people in Korea, then anything is possible. And that is the truth of this story. Not the revenge, not the riches, not even the romance. The truth is that we all have more strength within us than we know. We just have to find the courage to discover it.